Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all today to the final meeting of the 16th session of the COSP, namely the interactive dialogue with UN entities and other stakeholders on the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the CRPD. Dear colleagues, as you are surely aware, this year's session centered on the overarching theme of harmonizing national policies and strategies with the CRPD, achievements and challenges. This indeed is a topical theme, given that state parties are in the midst of the implementation phase of the CRPD. In the years since the adoption of the CRPD and the 2030 Agenda, there has been an increasing appreciation of advancing disability-inclusive development as an effective means to realize the rights of persons with disabilities, as set out in the CRPD. Harmonization of these efforts is therefore essential to maximize the benefits for persons with disabilities at all levels, particularly at this critical juncture fraught with multiple intersecting challenges threatening the hard-won progress we have achieved thus far. I wish to acknowledge with appreciation UN entities' major contributions to and their close engagement with member states, organizations of persons with disabilities, and other stakeholders for the implementation of the CRPD, particularly in the context of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This interactive dialogue, therefore, comprises an important forum to exchange knowledge and share good practices among state parties, UN partners, and civil society stakeholders, with the aim of aligning the work that we do with the standards and the principles of the CRPD. Now I would like to warmly welcome our distinguished panelists for part one of today's interactive dialogue representing the following UN entities. His Excellency, Mr. Lee Junhua, Under-Secretary General of the UN Department for Economic and Social Affairs. Mr. Facundo Chavez Penillas, Coordinator of the Human Rights and Disability Unit, Office of the Higher Commissioner for Human Rights. Ms. Diane Keita, Deputy Executive Director Program and Assistant Secretary General, United Nations Population Fund. Ms. Daryl Barrett, Technical Lead Disability, World Health Organization. Ms. Roxana Widler Iliescu, Senior Coordinator for Digital Inclusion Development Bureau, International Telecommunication Union. Ms. Ola Abulghaib, Manager of the United Nations Partnership on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Ms. Armida Salicia Alisjabana, Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary, Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, who will deliver a video statement. I will kindly invite each of our panelists to make a presentation of 5 minutes. We will then invite delegations and other observers to participate in an interactive discussion with panel members. Delegations and participants may request the floor by pressing the button on their desk, only after the floor is opened for questions and comments following the presentations. If you are given the floor, please unmute your microphone and indicate your name, followed by the name of your delegation or organization. Please note, all interventions shall be strictly limited to no longer than 2 minutes, with no exception. To kickstart this dialogue, it is my honor to introduce our first panelist, Mr. Lee Junhua, Under-Secretary General of the UN Department for Economic and Social Affairs. Mr. Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the floor. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, my dear UN colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. As the Undersecretary General for the Economic and Social Affairs, I'm very honored to join this interactive dialogue among state parties, the UN system, and the civil society. This honor further reflects the role that has been entrusted to the Department of the Economic and Social Affairs, or the UNDESA, in supporting the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of the Persons with Disabilities. I'm pleased to share with you some of activities that we have undertaken as a part of this effort. DESA works to assist the member states in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and other international commitments. In the spirit of the leaving no one behind, these objectives should be realized for, with, and by persons with disabilities. The Convention provides a framework for this work. As the focal point on the disability matters within the UN Secretariat, DESA ensures that the work of the UN system on disability is effectively integrated into discussions across the intergovernmental bodies and processes, including the General Assembly, ECOSOC, the Commission for Social Development, High-Level Political Forum, Internet Governance Forum, and other bodies focused on the development issues. DESA also co-leads and coordinates the work of the Interagency Support Group on the CRPD and the Interdepartmental Task Force on Accessibility. The mainstreaming of the disability awareness and the considerations in the development field lies at the core of our work and guides our deliveries on both analytical and capacity development initiatives. Last year, in response to the request of the General Assembly, DESA undertook a study on implementation of the 2030 Agenda for persons with disabilities. The findings helped inform the report of the Secretary General on inclusive development for and with persons with disabilities, providing insights on recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic by building a more inclusive, accessible, and sustainable world. This year, we are conducting a study on the protection and the safety of the persons with disabilities in situations of risk and humanitarian emergencies, and another on promoting and mainstreaming the easy-to-understand communication for accessibility for persons with disabilities, both aimed at informing the Secretary General's report on disability that is being prepared for the 78th session of the General Assembly. Later this year, we will release an update to the Disability and Development Report published in 2018 to reflect on progress towards the SDGs for persons with disabilities. This has been undertaken in collaboration with other UN system entities, international financial institutions, member states, and civil society, including organizations of persons with disabilities. At the halfway mark for the delivering on the 2030 Agenda, this update will be an invaluable resource in ensuring that our urgent push to finish does not leave persons with disabilities behind. Our attention to improving data on persons with disabilities has continued, as well as our efforts to ensure that all data collection processes include persons with disabilities. To fill the data gap, DESA has engaged with the civil society organizations to launch a collaborative on citizen data. Implementation of the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy also remains one of the DESA's top priorities. We continue to implement our own 5-year plan for disability inclusion and to support the implementation of the strategies throughout the UN system. We continue to work towards improving the accessibility of the meetings and the events by facilitating the use of sign language interpretation and through the real-time captioning and other means. We aim to ensure that the persons with disabilities have access to our work on issues concerning them. DESA stands ready to support the member states, UN system entities, civil society, and all relevant stakeholders to make the aspiration of the Convention and of the 2030 Agenda the reality of life for all persons with disabilities. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Lee Junhua for his insightful contribution. Our next speaker is Mr. Facundo Chavez Penillas, Coordinator of the Human Rights and Disability Unit of the Office of the Higher Commissioner for Human Rights. Mr. Penillas, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, it is my pleasure to address the 16th Conference of State Parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities at this crucial moment of our journey to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This year, we have reached the midpoint of progress towards a more inclusive, sustainable, accessible, peaceful, and just world for all. Our office welcomes the efforts by states to define and advance urgent and meaningful actions to accelerate SDG implementation in key areas relevant to the promise to leave no one behind. Let me thank Ireland and Qatar for their leadership on the drafting of the political declaration to be adopted at the SDG Summit later this year, which will lay the foundation for the global actions needed to deal both with today's challenges and with future threats, and to recognize their commitment to the human rights of persons with disabilities. The political declaration reiterates the commitment to leave no one behind. This shared vision unites us all. As we look ahead to the 2023 SDG Summit, it is vital that we define in concrete terms our strategic focus on persons with disabilities and on ensuring their ability to recover better from the pandemic and to face other emerging challenges. This focus must be reflected in the political declaration if we hope to deliver for persons with disabilities. The transformation of care and support systems will be essential to moving away from business as usual and to bringing about transformative change both for persons with disabilities and for gender equality. It is imperative that the political declaration articulate this with clarity and conviction. Encouragingly, care economy discussions continue to gain momentum, and yet the human rights of persons with disabilities have not been sufficiently integral part of the conversation. Needless to say, this is a topic that has profound impact on the lives, dignity, and rights of persons with disabilities. As such, their voice will be critical to arriving at meaningful solutions. Efforts to expand care economy without disability rights at the center risk replicating current flaws in systems that now undermine the dignity, agency, independence, and autonomy of persons with disabilities. We have a historic opportunity to correct the course, and we must not miss this chance. In February, the High Commissioner for Human Rights called on states to establish human rights-based, disability-inclusive, gender-responsive, and age-sensitive care and support systems at national level as a lever for sustainable development. Today, we call on states parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities to uphold their human rights obligations and to accelerate care and support system implementation through meaningful international action. The 2024 Summit for the Future will be a once-in-a-generation opportunity to boost the implementation of the commitment to leave no person with disabilities behind, to agree on concrete solutions to the challenges that persons with disabilities face, and reinvigorate human rights-based multilateralism. We call the pen holders of a Pact for the Future, Namibia and Germany, along with all state parties to the CRPD, to ensure that the pact includes persons with disabilities and their human rights. Colleagues, we need to accelerate our efforts for change. We stand ready to support you in every step of the way towards a transformed world in which all persons, including those with disabilities, can be guaranteed a life of dignity and respect. Finally, friends, on behalf of OHCHR, please allow me to use my final words today to say goodbye to human rights defenders Judy Human and Nalami Basharu, who passed away early this year, and Nalami just left us a couple of weeks ago. OHCHR remains committed to continue their work, combating injustice against persons with disabilities everywhere. Their extraordinary presence will be greatly missed, and their memory will forever be cherished. May them rest in power. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Penillas for his excellent remarks. Now I am pleased to present our next panelist, Ms. Diane Keita, Deputy Executive Director and Assistant Secretary General of the Program of United Nations Population Fund. Ms. Keita, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, salam. It is a privilege and an honor to be here with you all on behalf of the United Nations Population Fund. UNFPA welcomes this year's theme at the Conference of State Parties, which focuses on harmonizing national policies and strategies with the CRPD, Achievement and Challenges. The State of the World Population Report 2023 highlights that in our world of 8 billion, approximately 1 billion people will experience some form of disability during their lifetime. It is evident that we cannot achieve SDGs without implementing international and national policy frameworks that systematically mainstream the rights and needs of persons with disabilities. UNFPA welcomes wholeheartedly the sub-theme of the 3 roundtables. The first one, ensuring equal access to and accessibility to sexual and reproductive health services, digital accessibility, reaching underrepresented groups. I sincerely congratulate the member state for the selection of these important topics, and through them see the achievement and challenges people with disability face every day. Equal access to quality sexual reproductive health services is a cornerstone of universal health coverage. One of the main barriers is the societal stigma and discrimination that persons with disability often experience when trying to access services. Another barrier is the false belief that persons with disability do not have specific normal needs. They go to school, they work, they get married, they have babies. They may face mental issues on top of the disability if accessibility and inclusion are not achieved. Studies have shown that women and girls with disability need better trained teachers, midwives, and nurses toward the specific needs to avoid all sorts of complications that can be life-threatening. This injustice extends even when women and girls with disability attempt to access service in response to gender-based violence. In fact, out of 160 countries around the world that prohibit domestic violence, only 17 establish accessible services for women with disability who are survivors of violence. And only 1/4 of countries explicitly recognize the right of women with disability. Excellencies, congratulations on our common achievement, yet we have a long way to go. The United Nations Partnership on the Right of Persons with Disability, which UNFPA is a proud member of, is a unique partnership which brings together UN entities, government, organizations of persons with disability, and broader civil society to advance the rights of persons with disability around the world. We believe that the rights of persons with disability are at the heart of population and development. This is translated in our UNFPA Disability Inclusion Strategy, titled We Matter, We Belong, We Decide. And we are working hard, and we already met 75% of the indicators under the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy. Through our global flagship disability inclusion program, We Decide, we support human rights, leverage its technical expertise, and strengthen partnership for meaningful inclusion of women and young persons with disability. Around the world, UNFPA in Arab State Regional Office developed CHE, a smartphone application that provides information on reproductive health and prevention for gender-based violence for young people with visual and hearing impairment. In Morocco, we strengthened the collaboration and referral mechanism between healthcare professionals to improve multidimensional care for persons with disability. It is notable that Morocco's National Health and Disability Plan has been developed for 22 to 26. Congratulations. In Palestine, UNFPA works to improve the health of women in the Gaza Strip by providing individual midwifery counseling and psychosocial support. In Guatemala, we work with partners like Mujeres con Capacidad de Sonar a Colores, which use art and theater to create peer-to-peer connection for women with disability living in rural areas. In Mozambique, Mentor for Rapariga Bees program received training of UNFPA Decide for young people. And Zanura said, "My life changed when I met my mentor, who invited me to attend the girls' meeting. There, I made many friends and discovered that I could be happy." Excellencies, we will continue partnering with the organization of persons with disability so that they are in the driving seat. During the upcoming International Day of Climate Action in October, young persons with disability will advocate how climate change impacts the fulfillment of their rights and how their organization can engage. As the UN Secretary General said, led by persons with disability, we can and we will forge partnership, expand access to inclusive quality education and decent work, ensure healthy lives, and create a more inclusive, just, and sustainable world for all. Because everyone counts and possesses the unique potential of contributing to the life of their community, we all count on you to invest and fulfill our obligation outlined in the CPRD in order to make accessibility, inclusion, and true love our joint culture. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Keita, for your presentation. Now it's my honor to present our next panelist, Mr. Daryl Barrett, Technical Lead, Disability at the World Health Organization. Mr. Barrett, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, delegates, colleagues, and dear friends. States parties have an obligation and responsibility under Article 25 of the CRPD to ensure that persons with disabilities enjoy their inherent right to the highest attainable standard of health on an equal basis as others. But this is not a new right. It reaches back almost 60 years when the right to health was recognised through the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. However, regardless of this long-standing obligation, the inclusion of persons with disabilities in the health sector has consistently been an afterthought, leaving millions of people behind. The recently published WHO Global Report on Health Equity for Persons with Disabilities revealed that persons with disabilities experience a range of health inequities that, compared with the rest of the population, negatively impact on their health outcomes. For example, many persons with disabilities die up to 20 years younger. Many are at twice the risk of developing health conditions such as depression, diabetes, or cardiovascular disease, just to name a few. And many experience more limitations in day-to-day functioning, for example, related to inaccessible built environments or inaccessible transportation. These health inequities are driven by avoidable, unjust and unfair factors, including stigma, poor access to healthcare, exclusion from education or employment, and of course, poverty. Addressing these inequities for persons with disabilities is essential for many reasons, but I'd like to highlight two of those now. Firstly, addressing these inequities will ensure that 1.3 billion persons with significant disability enjoy their right to the highest attainable standard of health. Secondly, because advancing health equity for persons with disabilities is fundamental to achieving the 3 global health priorities, namely advancing universal health coverage, promoting better health and well-being of the population, and the protection of people during health emergencies, as well as, of course, progressing Sustainable Development Goal 3 and other related SDGs. Health equity can be advanced through building a fair health sector which provides opportunities for health for all members of society. This includes equitable and accessible provision of mainstream health services, such as accessible sexual and reproductive health care without financial hardship. And this is important considering that persons with disabilities face a range of sexual and reproductive health inequalities, including increased risk of violence, abuse and exploitation, and discriminatory practices in the health sector. A fair and equitable health system also means building accessible digital and telehealth, which is the future of the health service delivery in most populations. A fair and equitable health service also means engaging persons with disabilities and their representative organisations, especially the most marginalised and underrepresented members. This includes engaging them in all health sector decision-making. The WHO Global Report on Health Equity for Persons with Disabilities includes a list of 40 targeted disability actions, just like those that I have mentioned, which states parties can integrate within their health system and across their health system strengthening efforts. To support the implementation of the Global Report, WHO is developing a national strategic planning tool, a disability guide for action, which is already progressing in countries to address the factors that drive poor health outcomes for persons with disabilities. With these tools, there is no longer an excuse for a lack of action. And all of us have a shared responsibility to make equity for persons with disabilities a reality. While states parties have the ultimate power to achieving health equity, it can only happen through strong commitment and continued close collaboration between many. Collaboration between governments, civil society actors, including organisations of persons with disabilities, multilateral entities, and the private sector is what's necessary to make a real difference. WHO recognises the importance of health equity for persons with disabilities and has made this a priority which we are acting on at global, regional and country levels. We encourage states parties to act now, and we invite all to join us on this journey to realise the highest attainable standard of health for persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barrett. Our next distinguished speaker is Ms. Roxana Widmer-Iliescu, Senior Coordinator for Digital Inclusion Development, Bureau of International Telecommunication Union. Ms. Widmer-Iliescu, you have the floor.
Thank you. Honorable members of the United Nations, esteemed delegates, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I have the honor to present on behalf of the ITU Secretary General, Ms. Doreen Bogdan-Martin, the ITU recent activities to support the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Since our last report, ITU has developed several activities that engage over 700 ITU members, stakeholders, and decision makers across over 60 countries, aimed at strengthening knowledge of ICT digital accessibility. These activities encompassed training and expert advice provided to policy and decision makers from 14 countries from the Asia and Pacific region, guidance on member states on evaluation and monitoring implementation of ICT accessibility in line with CRPD, using the ITU tool and self-assessment towards building inclusive digital communities, delivery of executive training to regional ITU members and stakeholders, and finally, sharing good practices through interactive dialogues during our regional Accessible ICT for All forums which were held in Asia and the Pacific, Americas, Arab states, and Europe. To support the global efforts in implementation process, we've also raised awareness and promoted across over 30 events our over 70 resources and tools in ICT digital accessibility, which are all at no cost in multiple UN languages, localized where applicable, and most of these in digital accessible formats. These resources have been used within the reporting period by over 3,200 stakeholders and 761 participants who registered in our online self-paced training, confirming our broad impact. In partnership with ILO, ITU launched in last December a guidebook on accessibility of online job application and recruitment systems, along with an online self-paced training on how to ensure that online application and recruitment systems are accessible to all that complement the subject. ITU also strive to continuously update and improve our resources, and therefore our training on how to ensure inclusive digital communication during crisis and emergency situation is now available for you in 5 UN languages, expanding our reach and impact. Also, a practical guidebook in ICT accessibility for experts on agency developing and implementing the Smart Villages and Smart Islands program was also developed to improve the accessibility knowledge in the context of villages and island digitalization. In line with this year's theme of the CRPD, we are proud to report that ITU 2022 report survey indicates that 90 countries have now accessibility policies and regulatory measures in place, which represent a significant increase as compared with only 60 in 2018. From the standard perspective, a common ITU WHO global standard on accessibility of telehealth service was launched in June 2022 and updated in March 2023. The standards provide a set of requirements for implementers and service providers to help them ensure that services meet the needs of persons with disabilities. Our collaboration with WHO is being expanded to initiative focused on safe listening, now in gaming and esports, as well as through the establishment of a focus group to step up artificial intelligence contribution to health, developing a benchmarking framework to support developers and regulators in assessing whether AI-based health solutions. We also enhance the ITU search user interface, and we also try to design guidelines to provide online screen guidance to assist users with disabilities throughout their search progress. Also, we develop reports in future of broadcasting, accessibility to broadcasting services for persons with disabilities, and technical and operating parameters and spectrum used for short-range radio communication devices. Finally, we try to lead by example, and a compulsory training for all ITU staff in ICT accessibility and web accessibility were established. In the framework of UNDIS, we also had a nice performance and encouraging results in 2022. Finally, we work towards ensuring that ITU website page comply with the web content accessibility guidelines. To conclude, ITU firmly believe that mainstreaming digital accessibility collaboratively with the support of all stakeholders is key to achieve the goals of the Convention, and therefore we encourage you all to use and share ITU work and resources to jointly build the digital inclusive world we want. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Widmer Iliescu. I now invite Ms. Ola Abulghaib, Manager of Technical Secretariat of the United Nations Partnership on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, to share her insights. Ms. Ola, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. As we are discussing today the implementation of the Convention at the 16th session of the Conference of State Parties, the UNBRBD Fund is celebrating its 10th anniversary. The fund is a unique mechanism that brings together the UN system, governments, and organizations of persons with disabilities to support the implementation of the Convention on the ground. It is a unique collaboration that has been working since 10 years in 87 countries to try to promote more inclusive systems and processes. Our programs have transformed lives of millions of persons with disabilities through inclusive laws, policies, capacity building, engagement with organizations of persons with disabilities, and government bodies. Over the last 10 years, we have seen a momentum around the implementation of the Convention, gathering pace with the high number of countries signing and ratifying the Convention. Out of the 185 countries, we were almost in half of those countries trying to promote more inclusive practice. We can see now that there is an increasing interest from governments across the world seeking to turn their commitments into realities at national level. With the increasing momentum, we have also witnessed as a fund an increased demand for our work. That's why we are now striving to get more resources to work in 72 countries that are waiting for our support to reach them. However, our practice on the ground and evidence that we have been collecting recently from 26 countries through the situational analysis we conducted, we have seen that the progress at country level is slow. We have seen that countries are still not managing fully to transform their written commitment into concrete actions, implementation plans, budgets, and monitoring, and engagement with organizations of persons with disabilities. At the fund, we are constantly looking into best ways to advance our strategies to address those issues and accelerating the implementation at national level. This is vital, as the last few years have shown that the shocks and crises hit the world have highly impacted the rights of persons with disabilities. The COVID-19 pandemic, the climate shocks, and the war in Ukraine have demonstrated this is unfortunately a reality. That's why we as the fund in Ukraine have made immediate efforts to put actions in country and neighboring countries to respond to that crisis. Moving forward, we must ensure the international community works together to rapidly accelerate the implementation and ensure genuinely inclusive policies and systems are in place. At UNBRBD Fund, we recognize this can't be achieved through siloed work. We must work together collectively with organizations of persons with disabilities, governments, the UN system, and multilateral partners. Last year, UNBRBD Fund supported 38 programs and 5 multi-country programs to advance the implementation of the Convention alongside the realization of the SDGs. But we must do more. The fund, our partner agencies, and the whole UN system must work harder to address the gaps in CRPD implementation and accelerate the progress in all the countries that needs it most. Change can only be achieved through collective efforts, building learning on what works to translate those commitments into concrete action. And only through working together we can see that happening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Abul Ghaib, for your presentation. We will now screen a short video presentation delivered by our next distinguished panelist, Ms. Armida Salsia Alice Habana, the Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, who unfortunately could not be with us today. I ask the technician to screen the video, please. The voice, please. Unfortunately, we cannot hear Under Secretary General. So I ask our technicians to try to fix this technical issue. Otherwise, we will...
Pacific decades of persons with disabilities. The first 2 decades focus on shifting away from the medical and charity. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, I'm delighted to join you in this important dialogue on the implementation of the convention. ESCAP has been actively promoting and leading disability inclusive development efforts in the region for the past 30 years. Starting in 1993, member states have proclaimed 4 consecutive Asian Pacific decades of persons with disabilities. The first 2 decades focus on shifting away from the medical and charity models of disability towards a rights-based approach, which contributed to the birth of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or CRPD. To guide the third decade, member states adopted the Incheon strategy to make the right real for persons with disabilities in Asia and the Pacific. The Incheon strategy aimed to support member states in making the rights outlined in the CRPD a reality through the first set of regionally agreed disability-specific development goals. Goal 9 of the Incheon strategy calls on member states to accelerate the ratification and implementation of the CRPD and the harmonization of national legislation with the convention. Currently, 49 of the 55 ESCAP members and associate members with treaty-making capacity have ratified or acceded to the convention. ESCAP's recent publication on the harmonization of national laws with the CRPD provides an overview of trends in Asian Pacific and seeks to support member states in enhancing their harmonization efforts through a set of comprehensive recommendations. In preparation for the final review of the third decade, ESCAP conducted a survey to assess the current state of disability inclusive development. Some of the most common achievements noted by governments included the development of disability law, policies and strategies, and improvements in physical accessibility, health, rehabilitation, and education. While the Asia-Pacific region made commendable progress in the third decade, much more needs to be done. Across the region, persons with disabilities generally experience high rates of poverty and unemployment, and children with disabilities are less likely to attend school. Only 1 in 4 persons with disabilities are employed, and 7 in 10 persons with disabilities do not have social protection. Persons with disabilities are also underrepresented in decision-making processes. The ESCAP survey found that persons with disabilities constitute less than 1% of the total number of parliamentarians in the region. Recognizing the need to reaffirm the region's commitment to disability inclusive development, member states declared a 4th decade through the Jakarta Declaration, which was adopted during the high-level intergovernmental meeting last October in Jakarta, Indonesia. The Jakarta Declaration highlights 6 areas for strategic investment to accelerate action to promote and protect the rights of persons with disabilities. The first priority is on harmonizing national legislation with the CRPD. The Jakarta Declaration advocates conducting comprehensive reviews of national legislation, providing guidance on the implementation of the Convention, and training all personnel involved in the law enforcement on the Convention. It further highlights integrating the provision of reasonable accommodation in national policies, programs, and budget, and developing and strengthening frameworks to promote, protect, and monitor the implementation of the CRPD. The other 5 strategic areas highlighted in the Jakarta Declaration are the meaningful participation of persons with disabilities, universal design-based accessibility, engagement of the private sector, gender-responsive life cycle approach to disability inclusion, and progress tracking of disability-inclusive development. ESCAP is currently developing an operational guide to support member states in collaboration with the UN system and other stakeholders in the implementation of the Jakarta Declaration. I look forward to working closely with all of you during the new disability decade. I'm confident that under the framework of the Jakarta Declaration, we will continue to advance progress to make the right real for persons with disabilities in the Asia-Pacific region. Thank you very much.
I thank Ms. Alice Yahbana, and I would like to thank all panelists for their interesting presentations and thought-provoking insights. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let us now move on to the second segment of part 1 of the interactive dialogue, the interactive discussion between the panelists and delegations and other observers. We have very limited time given the packed agenda of this meeting, so kindly I ask all colleagues to limit their questions and comments to no more than 1 to 2 minutes. Please be reminded that delegations and participants may request the floor by pressing the button on your desks. We call to the floor, please unmute. When called to the floor, please unmute your microphone and identify yourself. So the floor is open. I have on my list Ecuador, followed by DRC, and then Morocco. Ecuador, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Very good afternoon. I'm from Ecuador, and I'm very pleased to be here to address this pressing issue, the situation of persons with disabilities who are underrepresented in global policy making. We need to shed light on poverty and extreme poverty, in particular when it affects persons with disabilities. There's a high correlation between disability and the risk of poverty. If we bring attention of the general population to this, we hope to improve and change policies. Disabilities impact people worldwide, and they are doubly vulnerable. Not only do they need to overcome the barriers because of their disability, but they also come up against socioeconomic challenges which impacts their opportunities to have a full and dignified life. Ecuador is seeing a disability not as a challenge, but as an opportunity for persons with disabilities. We aim to address barriers and ensure inclusion of persons with disabilities throughout society. We have a national plan to create opportunities in line with Agenda 2030. We are creating equal opportunities in the labor market and promoting further adaptation tools for daily life. We are promoting. The microphone has been cut off.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ecuador, and I give now the floor to the representative of DRC. You have the floor.
Oui, merci pour la parole.
Thank you for giving me the floor, sir. My statement is on what was said by the United Nations Partnership on the Rights of Persons with Disability. I followed that with a great deal of interest. It was said that there are many countries who are expecting resources so as to help them implement the conventions. And I would like to say that DRC is one of the countries who is making efforts to employ the convention institutionally, legally, and even when it comes to regulations. And we do need support both technically and materially and financially. I would like to ask the partnership to come and support us. We do have a great deal of people with disabilities, especially taking into account the war in the country. And we are making efforts, but we need the experience, technical experience, and other resources. So I am launching an appeal asking for funds and partnerships to come and help the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Morocco.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, President. I also would like to thank all of the experts for their high-quality presentations, and I would like to share with all of you the experience in my country in terms of interaction and implementation of the provisions of the Convention. We acceded to the Convention in 2009 and also to the protocol in the same year. And since then, the Kingdom has been sparing no efforts so as to harmonize our legislative framework with the provisions of the Convention. So the principle of non-discrimination has been institutionalized. In addition to that, we criminalize the discrimination of people with disabilities in all our national laws. Also, the Kingdom of Morocco modified the laws and institutions on the National Council on Human Rights. We have now there a commission on implementing the rights of people with disabilities. Similarly to the mechanism on recourse of violation of the rights of children and the use of torture. Similarly, in 2015, we passed a framework law on the rights of people with disability. The same year, we adopted an integrated public policies to promote the rights of people with disability between 2015 and 2025. We also created an interministerial commission to monitor the situation. As we interact with the committee, we launched a preparation of the second, third, and fourth report. And this brings in all of the stakeholders, civil societies, territorial communities. So the sound is cut off.
I thank the representative of Morocco. And now I invite the representative of the Philippines to take the floor.
Good day. I'm Rhea Ramos from the Government of the Philippines. Earlier this year, the country team of UNICEF in the Philippines requested an informational session with the National Council on Disability Affairs, the government's lead agency for all disability concerns, with the goal of establishing a more formal partnership. I was able to speak before the esteemed country team of UNICEF in the Philippines, and I'm grateful for the interest of UNICEF in strengthening and mainstreaming its efforts in disability concerns through its new country program. On behalf of the Philippines and its National Council on Disability Affairs, I would like to take this opportunity to restate that we look forward to formalizing this partnership in order to better serve children with disabilities. Likewise, we are grateful to UNOHCHR for selecting the Philippines for the pilot testing of its National Recommendations Tracking Database. We believe this tool will prove useful to help countries keep track of its fulfillment of the recommendations from various constructive dialogues, including with the CRPD, and we look forward to the official rollout of this system. As we have observed from the workshop and the pilot testing conducted by UNOHCHR earlier this year, this system is a transparent tool that could be a consistent reminder to the state's duty bearers of how much action needs to be done, thus facilitating recommendations from treaty bodies, including the CRPD, to be lived realities and helping realize true inclusion for all persons with disabilities. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Philippines, and now I give the floor to the representative of Namibia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would really like to congratulate the presenters. Their presentations was really of thought-provoking, as you have rightly put it. Now my question is maybe to Ola, in terms of the funding of the UPR. As a country, Namibia, that have ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and also other legal instruments, and that we are really trying to implement and bring it in line with the UN CRPD. We'd just like to, because we are also battling with funding and so on, since the country is regarded as a middle-income country, but which is on the ground not really the reality. So we would just like to find out how could we, as a country or as government, benefit from this UPR funding in terms of the implementation of the legal instrument. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the participants for their comprehensive presentations and to echo a lot of the sentiments here on the ground. The CRPD embodies a paradigm shift towards a social model that has recognized persons with disabilities as full and equal members of society. Disability is not an isolated issue, but an integral part of our collective social fabric. And I'd like to highlight employment opportunities, inclusivity, and make reference to what was presented in terms of funding, especially in support of IT and ICT and smart villages. While in Guyana, we have been able to advance significantly through our budgetary allocation towards technical vocational training, entrepreneurship, and the creation of spaces for all of these, including business and marketing. And we are moving towards inclusion in the labor force. How can our country access funding and resources from international agencies and developed countries as we strive for meaningful change? And we look towards having assistance where the policies are assessed using tools that are standardized to know exactly where we are in the implementation of CRPD. So looking towards some assistance and guidance on that as the world looks towards understanding where we are with reference to persons living with disabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your interesting comments and questions posed to the panel. I will now give the floor to our distinguished panelists. If they wish to provide their responses to the questions raised, we would like kindly to ask each panelist to limit their response to approximately 2 minutes. Yes, I have Ms. Ola. You have the floor.
Thank you so much for the comments with regards to our supported countries. The comments that came from the floor just confirms the testimony that the needs are large on the country level, and we do recognize that, and that's why we are constantly seeking additional resources to enable us to meet the demand and the urgent needs of countries. Maybe just quick responses to colleagues that asked about DRC. I'm very pleased to say that we are actually now at the moment of launching a program in DRC that is to be implemented by our members of OHCHR, UNESCO, and UN Women. And please reach out to us, and we're happy to provide further details on that. For the question on Namibia, we had actually a program that closed a few years ago, And we do recognize that the needs in countries do need, even though if we were there, further support and need, and we are constantly seeking further resources to meet that. But please keep an eye on our work, because as soon as we have resources, we constantly launch additional calls for proposals for countries to respond to that. So hopefully we will continue to be able to respond to the need, but we actively engage with countries to try to understand their demands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abul Ghaib. Yes, I have Mr. Penillas. You have the floor.
Thank you, colleagues, for your comments. I just wanted to add to the comment from Guyana in relation to not only to the funding and to the support that perhaps the PRPD can provide, but there are specific tools that we have developed in consultation with a number of UN entities to monitor implementation of internal policies, to look at sector-specific issues, including employment, for example, and that also have indicators for the CRPD, right? And using the methodology of human rights indicators, you can establish structure indicators, process indicators, and outcome indicators, so you can measure in a standardized way internal programs and so on. And these are also an integral part of UN PRPD guidance and project development in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Penillas. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to extend my... we have Ms. Roxana Eliescu. You have the floor.
Thank you for this. I will be very punctual with regard to the last comment made by the representative of Guyana. So on smart cities, 70% of the world population will live in smart cities in the next 3 decades. So everybody, it's very much interesting. I just want to share that you can use several ITU resources on this, all free of charge in multiple UN languages. I would particularly recommend the training beyond smart cities, Smart for All, because we realize that there is a need to include accessibility for design. And finally, something that I suppose will respond to many of our comments, how to evaluate and monitor implementation of in line with the CRPD articles, as largely try to raise awareness. ITU developed 2 years ago a toolkit and self-assessment. It takes only 20 minutes to be done, with the possibility to receive, based on CRPD articles, with the possibility to receive back-to-back tailored policies and strategies, good practices, and also give you the possibility to monitor further implementation. Offline, I can tell you more, but you find everything. All is free of charge. This is in all 6 UN languages, so please use it. And please go in ITUD website, ICT Digital Accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roxana. I think we have no more comments from our distinguished panelists. I would like to extend my warm thanks to the panel for your contributions and participation today. Ladies and gentlemen, I kindly ask for your patience as we move on to the next segment of today's interactive dialogue with other mandates and stakeholders.
Here. Get up.
Order. Distinguished delegates, let us move on to part 2 of today's interactive dialogue. Please allow me to introduce our distinguished panelists.
You're noisy. See people still gathering there. Very excited.
Please, distinguished delegates, please, we started our second part of our meeting. So allow me to introduce our distinguished panelists. We have Ms. Gertrude Oforiwa Fafoame, Chairperson of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Ms. Maria Soledad Cisternas Rice, UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for Disability and Accessibility, Ms. Robina Alambuya, President of Transforming Communities for Inclusion and Vice Chair of the African Disability Forum, representing civil society, and we will have Mr. Gerard Quinn, Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's my honor to welcome and invite our first panelist, Ms. Fafoame, Chairperson of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Ms. Fafoame, the floor is yours. I kindly remind you to limit your presentation to 5 minutes. Thank you.
President, members of the Bureau, Excellencies, UN entities, CRPD committee members, delegates, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate the space for accountability on the work carried out in response to this demand. I'd like to take the opportunity to present highlights of the committee's work for the past year. The committee had 14 constructive dialogues with state parties delegations and adopted 14 concluded observations concerning all obligations and rights. We also updated 10 lists of issues and 2 lists of issues prior to reporting as part of the review processes. We also considered 7 individual communications under the optional protocol and considered information and procedures related to allegations of grave and or systematic violations of rights under the Convention. Furthermore, we adopted General Comment 8, 2022 on the rights of persons to work and employment. The committee is aware that ableism adversely affects the right to work and urge state parties to repeal all discriminatory legislation that excludes or limits the participation of persons with disabilities in the open labor market. In addition, the committee adopted its guidelines on deinstitutionalization, including in emergencies, CRPD 6/5, and this complements the committee's General Comment number 5, 2017, on living independently and being included in the community, and its guidelines on the right of persons with disability to liberty and security, A/72/55 Annex. The committee urged states to ensure transition of persons with disabilities from institutions to independent living community in equal basis with others. The committee continued its interaction with other human rights bodies and United Nations agencies and programs, particularly concerning the human rights-based approach to disability in an effort to achieve the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And additionally, we continue to engage with national human rights institutions, independent mechanisms and frameworks, regional organizations, organizations of persons with disabilities, and other civil society organizations. We have also decided to prepare a general comment on Article 11 of the Convention on Situation of Risk and Humanitarian Emergencies. During this week, I and my committee members have met some state signatories to the convention, encouraging them for better implementing and also to start procedures for ratification of the convention and the optional protocol, having acknowledged the importance of the ratification campaign promoted by the High Commissioner for Human Rights and the framework of the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. I'd like to mention some challenges in the work of the committee. 1, there are 7 weeks of plenary meetings and 1 week of meetings of the pre-sessional working group has not increased since 2014. However, the membership of the convention has increased from 130 to 186 state parties from 2013 to 2023. As a result, as a result of sufficient meeting time and staff resources, the average time for the consideration for initial reports has reached 6 years. And this is since the time for the submission, and 4 years for periodic reports. The committee is the treaty body with the highest, largest backlog of reports pending to be considered. 74 reports at the end of 2022. 2, limited understanding and sufficient implementation of accessibility and reasonable accommodation standards. And these are by the concerned entities. 3, the decision of United Nations Conference Services to limit remote interpretation up to 30 minutes during the 3-hour hybrid missions disproportionately affect the online participation of persons with disabilities. 4, lack of funds for plain language and easy-read versions of documents, and this has been a gap since the committee was established. I'd like to invite all stake parties to informal and awareness-raising activities we will organize as part of this August-September session. I will conclude by reaffirming the committee's commitment to work with UN entities, human rights mechanisms and agencies, state and organizations of persons with disabilities, civil society organizations, and all other stakeholders in advancing the sub-themes addressed during this course. This we need to do through an intersecting lens. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Fefoame, for your excellent presentation. Now it is my honor to present our next panelist, Ms. Maria Soledad Cisternas Reyes, Special Envoy on Disability and Accessibility. Please, Ms. Reyes, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, embajador, presidente de...
Thank you very much to the President, Excellencies, distinguished panelists. Congratulations to Gertrude on her statement. I wish to say that at this last session, taking account of our mandate, which is to promote the rights of persons with disabilities based on the CRPD and related to the 2030 Agenda, we have been able to develop guidelines and documents which have to do with inclusive education, also with judges and motherhood for women with disabilities. This has led to written documents, but also to videos which help to introduce others to these issues and which focus on specific disabilities. We have videos for children and for teens on their classmates with disabilities. We also have audiovisual material on issues such as the right to education and access to justice from the vantage point of judges. And we also have the video which you saw at the beginning on motherhood for women with disabilities. I can tell you that during this session, other videos were put together during the mandate, rather, says the speaker, to ensure universal access and quality access for persons with disabilities. I'm referring specifically to digital and technological accessibility. There are guidelines and an accompanying video. There are also 8 campaigns with audiovisual guidelines, and I invite everyone, all member states and organizations from civil society, anyone who is interested, to use this material in your own countries. You can set up workshops for staff working in a number of fields. We've also ensured cross-cutting activities as we address the needs of women with disabilities. We also have I would remind you of the political statement that was made on the first day of our session. A number of statements were made, but I'd like to refer to the need to have the UN gender parity strategy included across the board and to address women with disabilities working in the organization as well. Inclusive education has also been a central component of the mandate. And cross-cutting actions for persons with living with disabilities. In that area, a great deal of work has been done. to address the rights of persons with disabilities. And we brought this to the grassroots level. I just want to close with this short list by saying that over the past year, I've been part of some 600 meetings and chats and also online meetings. So that means some 600 presentations that I've made in these various formats. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Reyes, for your excellent intervention. Our next distinguished speaker is Ms. Robina Alambuya, President of Transforming Communities for Inclusion, representing civil society. Ms. Alambuya, you have the floor.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues from organizations of persons with disabilities, and civil society gathered here today. It is a privilege to be speaking at the closing of the 16th Conference of State Parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities on behalf of civil society. I represent the Africa Disability Forum, a Pan-African organization of persons with disabilities, which is a member of the International Disability Alliance. I speak today as an African woman with a disability and as a person with psychosocial disability. I emphasize different aspects of my identity because all too often in law and in practice, the multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination faced by persons with disabilities are not recognized, and the marginalization remains unaddressed. Over the past several days, we have heard from member states on the work that has happened to promote the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We greatly appreciate the CRPD guidelines on deinstitutionalization, including in emergencies, adopted at the 27th CRPD session, and call for its prompt and comprehensive implementation. While we recognize that progress as representatives of persons with psychosocial disabilities, it is also my duty to highlight that we still need to be vigilant more than ever to ensure that the CRPD is implemented for all persons with disabilities, particularly those who continue to remain the most marginalized and underrepresented. Unfortunately, the paradigm shift remains a dream for many persons with disabilities around the world. The social mode of disability is a non-negotiable, and as the world grapples with issues at the intersection of health and disability, particularly on mental health and non-communicable diseases, we need to remind and reinforce that we cannot go back on internationally agreed standards in the CRPD. Any discourse on health equity, including mental health, must be underpinned by human rights and the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, not by medical model-based approach. The risk of losing some of the progress we have made on inclusion of persons with disabilities is very real. 15 years after the CRPD came into force, we still have to ask ourselves, how does the world respond to the diversity of all persons with disabilities? This question is accurately relevant as the world gets ready to discuss the acceleration of the Sustainable Development Goals and the Summit of the Future. Disability inclusion still seems to be an add-on to the policy making and programming rather than a fundamental principle underpinning them. When the Secretary General said it's time to sound the alarm for the Sustainable Development Goals, we must sound the alarm even louder for persons with disabilities. Ladies and gentlemen, unjust systems will lead to unjust outcomes. Hope is not a strategy. We cannot expect disability inclusion when our systems are not designed to be so. Now is the time for concrete actions, for transformative shifts. Now is the time to change our systems. We must recognize we need an intersectional approach to disability inclusion. We must have data to drive inclusive policy making. We need dedicated funding for inclusive development. We need a people-centered approach that builds on the principle of meaningful participation of organizations of persons as enshrined in the CRPD. Excellencies, as we close the 16th session, we call on member states, multilateral organizations, civil society, organizations of persons with disabilities, and everyone gathered here today. Let us all ask ourselves, what can we do differently to create an accessible and inclusive world, ensure community inclusion, and address the root causes of exclusion experienced by persons with disabilities? I thank you. Peace and love.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Alambuya. To conclude the panel presentations, we will hear from Mr. Gerard Quinn, Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Mr. Quinn is sadly unable to join us here in New York as at today's interactive dialogue. We will screen a video of his presentation. So please let us proceed to see the video.
Secretary General, President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates and participants, I wish to thank the Bureau for the invitation to participate in the closing of the 15th session of the Conference of States Parties. It's been a rich and intense set of discussions with many new perspectives and ideas emerging. As always, the main value of COSP is to have a space where all interested parties, states, civil society and others can share perspectives, challenges, obstacles, and point together to solutions. Through COSP, you've all found ways to express your passion and to put forward innovative ideas. I began at the opening of COSP by talking about one of my passions, which is the balance of risks and opportunities faced by persons with disabilities due to the disruptive nature of artificial intelligence. I look forward to be briefed on the nature of the discussions you've had on the topic. A lot will turn on how humanity can harness this new force, hopefully a force for good. Let me end by commenting on the third theme this year, how to ensure that underrepresented groups are heard. Of course, the AI debate is part of that debate since it has many liberating opportunities. But allow me to focus on something else. What do we mean by underrepresented groups? Maybe partly due to the medical model, we have tended in the past to think of this predominantly in terms of different diagnostic categories of disability, whether physical, sensory, psychosocial, or other. I would argue we also need a more situational sense of who is underrepresented by looking at exclusionary processes in a variety of domains and who they impact. For example, whole categories of persons with disabilities are now beginning to be liberated around the world from institutionalization and legal incapacity. Their long neglected voice still needs to be heard, especially on the modernization of social services and care systems. Refugees with disabilities and internally displaced persons with disabilities are rarely heard. Why not? We all know that civilians are among the first and worst victims of armed conflict, yet the voices of civilian victims with disabilities are almost invisible, given that they contribute an average of 15% of any given civilian population. This is just unacceptable. Furthermore, persons with disabilities hold key insights about inclusion that can act as a cement for a peace-building process, yet they seem to be systematically excluded from most peace-building processes worldwide. Why? And alliances across civil society groups, so central to any process of change, has been traditionally fraught and difficult when it comes to disability. This means that your chance of getting a message across are somewhat less. This systemic lack of opportunity to build coalitions and alliances actually reduces your voice. It's no accident that persons with disabilities were described as a discrete and insular minority, disadvantaged in the democratic process in the Americans with Disabilities Act. Hard to reach doesn't just mean hard to reach on account of one's disability. It means hard to reach because traditional processes for facilitating voice are simply not attuned to how the voices of persons with disabilities are to be heard in a variety of domains. This under-inclusiveness affects all. This invisibility affects all. Who loses? Everybody loses. Many have commented on how the disability rights agenda overlaps with the debate about democratization. I fundamentally agree. Writing several centuries ago, Jean-Jacques Rousseau said, "No one can represent you, you can only represent yourself." Our challenge is to find ways of eliminating the distorting variables that don't allow voice to be heard. It isn't just the technical difficulty accompanying particular disabilities that has to be addressed. It has to do with the legacy of exclusion and invisibility affecting persons with disabilities in so many different domains. As you wind down and travel home after another successful COSP, I urge you to think about the link between democracy and disability. This is a two-way street. Greater engagement means better decision-making processes and better and more legitimate outcomes. And better engagement means more responsive governance to the people. At the end of the day, this is why the alliance between human rights, democracy, and the rule of law is so important, and disability makes that linkage self-evident. Thank you so much, and I wish you all the best on your return journeys.
I thank Mr. Quinn for his contribution, and I would like to thank all panelists for their presentations. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we may now move to the second interactive discussions. But due to time constraints, the floor will be open only for 5 minutes, as we have to resume agenda item 5, which is the general debate. So, once again, delegation and participants may request the floor by pressing the button on your desks. Just for questions, please, because we have only 5 minutes. I have... Yes, I have Russian Federation. You have the floor.
Спасибо. Thank you, Mr. President. Since our time is limited, let me just move on directly to the questions. In August last year, in the course of the 27th session of the committee, an interactive dialogue was held, and it was on the situation of peoples with disability in Ukraine. And we have a question here. The question is as follows. Is there a practice of conducting interactive dialogues as regards other countries? We have not heard of that. And unfortunately, the very dialogue itself became a platform to disseminate politicized accusations against my country. There was no criticism at all against the leadership of Ukraine. And the second question we have is as follows. When will the committee finally speak out in support of the Russian and Belarusian Paralympians who, over a very long period of time, have been denied the right to participate in international athletics competitions? At the same time, in March of this year, the Appeals Tribunal of the International Paralympics Committee annulled the decision to suspend the membership of the Russian and Belarus Paralympic Committee's membership. We think that the committee here has to say its word in support of the Paralympic athletes. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Russian Federation, and I give now the floor to a representative of Colombia.
Thank you. I have a very specific question. In COP16, very specific themes were placed on the table on intersectionality. Colombia is undergoing reform and changes to our structure to address social inequalities and disabilities. So my question is very specific. Recommendations for new institutional structures. What recommendations would you make with regard to shedding light on issues faced by indigenous communities and persons with disabilities, or our youth and people in general living with disabilities, because these all are on an equal footing in the Ministry for Social Inequalities, and we just wonder about addressing them in a cross-cutting fashion. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Colombia, and now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Guyana.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I have 3 specific questions. I'd like to thank all the distinguished panelists for their excellent presentations. One, are there any resources that could guide developing or underdeveloped countries in autism, and specifically looking at the escalating numbers after the COVID-19 pandemic? Secondly, are there effective communication and training tools for persons who require sign language that is standardized and available to developing countries? And thirdly, are there any data collection tools that are able to help countries as they integrate their systems and could be freely provided to developing countries for persons living with disabilities? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Guyana. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Belarus.
Thank you, Mr. President. Over the past year, Belarus has been trying to obtain from UN bodies that they impartially assess the decisions made by the International Paralympic Committees as regards our athletes and Russian athletes, and see to what extent they're in line with the convention. And so far, this has been in vain. We would be very happy to hear comments thereupon. Thank you.
Very much for your question. And I have my last request is from National Human Rights Institution 6 in chair 6.
Me? Okay. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would like to congratulate the organizers for choosing a very important item, which is the harmonization. And I would like to focus on how will we capture the importance of harmonization in our recommendations in order to ensure harmonization of legislation, empowerment of national entities in charge of human rights of persons with disabilities, empowering national human rights institutions established by the Paris Principles in order to join the struggle for the rights of persons with disability, harmonization of data collection in order to reveal the most vulnerable groups and to target, and how to garner resources, because as a result of the international crisis, resources allocated for human rights, especially people with disabilities, is drying. So how will we garner international cooperation in a way to ensure that there is enough resources to implement the human rights of people with disabilities? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much for your question. Ladies and gentlemen, I will now turn to our distinguished panelists to provide their responses to the questions posed. We have a very short time before moving on to the next segment. I would like kindly to ask each panelist to keep their responses very brief as possible. Thank you. Yes, I have Ms. Fifoa. May you have the floor.
Thank you, President. To the question about the committee conducting an
Microphone for the speaker, please.
Yes. Sorry. To the question about the committee conducting an informal consultation on a country, the committee did informal consultation on an issue that was brought to our attention. And so we don't do countries, but we invite state parties and interested agencies to come and we discuss. That is what happened. And another one on deinstitutionalization will happen in August, September, as I did invite state parties. On the question of the Paralympic issue, to be honest, I don't have an answer today. I will confer, and I wish that it comes to us in writing, and the Secretariat and the committee will debate and bring an answer. In addressing financial and human resources that is affecting implementation, yes, the space seems to be shrinking, but would encourage that we do not relent in our efforts, and that is the more reason why we keep advocating for intersecting forms of addressing the issues of disability, not forgetting the fact that the two-trunk approach, where direct funding needs to come to our issues, is also important. That is what we recommend. And in terms of the tools, there are a couple of tools on OHCR website that included some of the CRPDs, a couple by the movement, including International Disability Alliance. And I would encourage that if we have not found what we need, please write to us and we will work together with you. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your concise responses. I think I have Ms. Maria. You have the
microphone for the speaker, please.
Okay. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, just to answer Colombia's question, I think that the Ministry for Equality that is going to be set up needs to carry out a comparative in-depth analysis of policies and strategies in order to be successful. I've spoken with the person who's taking over that role, and I believe that that individual is very clear on that. As to the question on autism, and I would link that with the UNPRPD is a good forum to explore these issues and resources to be used.
Tiene como asociación mundial.
There are a number of sources of funding for this purpose, and that's all I can say. And this is the last time that I will be speaking here, and I'd like to thank everyone here. I love all of you, and Mr. Kitaki and Eddie Bonson, warm thanks to them. We've known each other for quite some time, and they work very hard for the United Nations. They're very aware of issues facing persons with disabilities.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Reis. I don't know if we have... I have Ms. Robina.
Okay, thank you so much. I just wanted to contribute on the question of autism. It's one of the disabilities that are underrepresented. And I would say that according to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, awareness raising is very key for the underrepresented groups. And then awareness about this particular disability and awareness about the specific needs of persons with autism. So it is a call to each one of us, because we are all brothers and sisters as human beings, to raise awareness, to try and understand and raise awareness and support persons, the voices of persons with autism to come out, and also to give them opportunity and space for them to have self-representation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you once again to our distinguished panel for their statements, and a special thanks to Ms. Robina Alambuya, representing civil society, for being here today. We will shortly move on to continuing the general debate and proceeding with the list of speakers. Thank you.
to go to
Yeah.
bathroom or whatever?
Yes,
Restroom?
please.
If you want.
Okay, we will see. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we will proceed with agenda item 5, general debate. And I would like to remind all speakers that the 3-minute speaking rule will be enforced, whereby the speaker's microphone will be cut off automatically. And I have on my list Kuwait. I give the floor to Kuwait.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Out of our conviction to ensure full participation of persons with disability in the social, political life, we have ratified and joined the CRPD on 14th February 2013. Kuwait has strived, represented by the National Commission for Persons with Disability, to adopt the SDGs within the vision, Kuwait Vision 2035. The Commission has operationalized a strategic plan 2020-2025 in cooperation with many government institutions and civil society organizations to prepare and implement the national policy for persons with disability. Out of our conviction that nothing about us without us, and to guarantee the representation of persons with disability and their full engagement in developing strategies for their inclusion within the society, the civil society organizations and sports clubs representing people of persons with disability, they are 24 in total. They conduct regular elections for the Higher Council of Disability and its board. Among the most important accomplishments of this higher council, in collaboration with government institutions, civil society organizations, and other stakeholders, is to train persons with disability to enroll in the labor market. The Department for Vocational Training provides different workshops to train persons with disability as technicians. We support 10 centers that provide rehabilitation and training services for ages 6 to 45 years of age, providing medical, health, and vocational training services. We also launched a campaign for employment of persons with disability in collaboration with many government and civil society organizations since 2018 by providing training and internship programs that resulted in the training and the graduation of 4 cohorts, the latest of which was this month. Accessibility. The Kuwaiti Design Institution has established the rules for accessibility, and they collaborate with all institutions to implement it. And we have as well the Accessibility Act for technological accessibility for persons with disability to facilitate their access to online data. And as well in the field of education, where we provide more education for more than 13,000 students for persons with disability, as well as early childhood, early intervention services. The microphone got cut off.
Representative of Kuwait. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Czechia.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Czechia aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. I would like to inform the distinguished delegates about what my country has done to contribute to the implementation of the Convention since the last States Parties Conference. In September 2022, Czechia, in its role as the presidency of the Council of the EU, held a conference on integration of people with disabilities into the labor market. Experts and professionals discussed major changes and challenges in the employment and employability of persons with disabilities, as well as the political and economic context and examples of good practices. The Czech government has addressed the personal mobility of persons with disabilities. We have continued to systematically remove barriers and ensure the accessibility of public offices, schools, cultural facilities, transport infrastructure, and other public buildings. To further improve the situation, the Czech government carried out an accessibility analysis on all the buildings owned by the Czech government offices. The resulting information on buildings' accessibility will be published on their websites by the end of June this year. The Czech national strategy for the development of social services for the period from 2016 to 2025 supports, among other things, moving people from institutional care to community care, reducing capacities of institutional care, and developing a network of community-based outpatient and low-capacity residential services. These days, the Ministry of Labour and Social Affairs of the Czech Republic, in cooperation with relevant stakeholders, has finished drafting an action plan for the institutionalization of social services for the period from 2023 to 2025. The main objectives of the action plan are as follows: reducing the number of people living in institutional care, transforming institutional social services into community-based services, supporting community-based services so that people can stay in their natural environment. And last but not least, supporting psychiatric care reform. All these issues have a significant impact on social services. The draft action plan will be submitted to the Czech government for adoption by the end of this month. Czechia has also shown solidarity with the people of Ukraine who have been affected by Russia's aggression. More than 480,000 refugees have left Ukraine and obtained temporary protection visas in Czechia. The state, regional and municipal authorities, as well as NGOs and humanitarian organizations operating in Czechia, continue.
I thank the distinguished representative of Czechia, and I give the floor to the representative of Myanmar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All protocol observed. Mr. Chair, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Myanmar became a state party or CRPD in 2011. Subsequently, the National Social Protection Strategic Plan was adopted in 2014. The Law on Protection and Promotion of Rights of Disability was enacted in 2015. And the National Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disability was established in 2017. In 2019, Myanmar, as a state party, submitted its initial report to the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disability. The report revealed that Myanmar had devoted to overcoming all previous stagnant situations of persons with disability and bring about tangible results for the promotion and protection of rights of persons with disability. It was clear that equality, non-discrimination, and socio-economic inclusion of persons with disability are the entrenched core priorities of Myanmar. Meanwhile, the vital nexus between the disability and education, poverty, and other essential elements were also underscored. On this basis, the elected civilian government had incorporated disability into the development agenda. COVID-19 pandemic created huge challenges for vulnerable groups of people, including persons with disability. These challenges had been exacerbated by the illegal military coup in February 2021 and its military atrocities. It resulted in increase of numbers of people with disability. Such atrocities do not discriminate people living in Myanmar, be they able or disabled, men or women, girls or boys, young or old. The vulnerable groups of people are heavily in need of multi-dimensional support. They are particularly at risk and require immediate and substantial access to life-saving assistance, healthcare, food security, and other humanitarian assistance. Mr. Chair, in conclusion, I wish to reiterate that timely and decisive action of the international community is immediately needed to address the issue of Myanmar, and the continued concrete support of the international community is urgently much required to bring Myanmar return to democracy and establish a federal democratic union in line with aspirations of Myanmar people. Only by doing so, Myanmar will be able to promote and protect the rights of not only persons with disability, but also everyone in Myanmar who have been suffering tremendously under the military dictatorship and longing for democracy, peace, and justice in Myanmar. Let's work together to further strengthen our efforts for persons with disability. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of Myanmar, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Suriname. Suriname, please. Okay, we move to Romania. Romania, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. To the statement of the European Union and the joint statement of the Group of Countries on Sexual Reproductive Health and Rights, allow me to present a few remarks in national capacity. Romania is proactively engaged to respect and support the creation of conditions that allow full and active participation in all areas of life for persons with disabilities, as framed by the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The Central Coordinating Authority for the implementation of the Convention is a specialized agency, the National Authority for the Protection of Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The list of achievements of our authority is long, particularly against the background of COVID-19 pandemic and the wave of refugees coming from Ukraine, some of which are also disabled and are entitled to access the same services as the Romanian citizens. However, I will resume only to 5 of them. First is support for deinstitutionalization. Second is related to reinforced network for social services. Third is related to boosting employment for persons with disabilities. The fourth pillar relates to better regulation and simplification, particularly with regard to strengthening the capacity for local authorities to deliver social services. And the fifth pillar is related to enhancing legal representation for persons with disabilities through legislative amendments that reflect a new view on guardianship. Mr. President, recently in April 2023, Romania adopted a new law that extended accessibility for persons with disabilities by means of new technologies. Its goal is to ensure independent living and integration in the community, including the access to public services. As the Secretary General put it in the opening of COSP16, leaving no one behind leaves no one offline. And the government of Romania already implements this recommendation. The National Disability Management System, responsible for the collection and real-time processing of information on disability, was recently integrated in the governmental cloud for digital administration. Here in New York, on the first day of the opening of COSP16, Romania co-organized together with ITU and the European Commission a side event on digital accessibility. We pay special attention to communicating to people with disabilities, and we shared Romanian good practices with regard to alert systems in case of emergencies. We are aware of the challenges and steps that still have to be taken to improve the lives of persons with disabilities, but we remain committed to walk the talk and reach the objective of achieving a fully accessible and inclusive society. Et je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of Angola.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me congratulate you, Chair, and the members of Bureau on your elections. Mr. Chair, in 2006, we committed ourselves through the Convention on the Right of Persons with Disability to achieve a world where persons with disability would enjoy equal rights and opportunities. This international legal framework has been reinforced by the United Nations Disability Inclusion Strategy launched by the Secretary General in 2019 to achieve a transformative and lasting change in disability inclusion. Despite the progress made since then, much remains to be done, fundamentally regarding the protections of persons with disability in armed conflicts. Excellencies, the number of people with disability in Angola is currently estimated at more than 600,000, mainly due for the 4 decades of internal conflict. Allow us to highlight some of the progress that has been achieved in the country in the recent years concerning the social inclusion of people with disability. First, Angola ratified the Convention and the Protocol of the African Charter on Human and People Rights on the right of persons with disability in Africa to promote, protect, and ensure that all individuals with disability can fully and equally enjoy all human rights and ensure respect for their inherent dignity of the human person. As a state party, Angolan legal framework encompasses the law on persons with disability, the accessibility law, as well as presidential decrees that regulate quotas on vacancies and procedures for hiring people with disability, and on the strategy for the social inclusion and protection of children with disability. Second, existing legislation not only protect the exercise of human rights of people with disability, but also provides guidance and sexual and reproductive education program for them. Third, to enhance those rights, the government recently adopted the Strategy for Rights of People with Disability integrated in National Program for Inclusion and Accessibility 2020-2027 and the National Program to Support People with Disability and Albinism. Fourth, with the implementation of the Convention, improvements were achieved in the field of social assistance, adapted sport, education, transport, health, physical rehabilitation.
I thank the distinguished representative of Angola, and I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of Uganda.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the government of Uganda, I'm honored to address all state parties present at this 16th session of the Conference of State Parties to the CRPD. Uganda's commitment to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, CRPD, and its optional protocol has been unwavering. Since ratifying it on the 25th September 2008, we have strived to ensure that persons with disabilities are granted the same rights and privileges as all other citizens. The CRPD has provided us with a broad framework to develop legislation, policies, and programs that aim to improve the lives of persons with disabilities. In this regard, the Persons with Disabilities Act 2020 in Uganda has adopted a comprehensive definition of disability, including physical, mental, sensory impairments, and environmental barriers that limit individuals' participation in society on an equal basis with others. It is estimated that 12.4% of Uganda's population has a disability, highlighting the significance of mainstreaming disability across all government programs. Inclusion of persons with disabilities in programs and governance has become a priority, ensuring their meaningful participation and decision-making processes. Mr. President, our journey to domesticate the Convention has been progressive. We repealed the outdated Persons with Disability Act 2006, which did not align with the UN CRPD, and replaced it with the comprehensive Persons with Disability Act 2020, which fully integrates the provisions of the CRPD. To further align our policies, the government of Uganda has formulated the revised National Policy for Persons with Disabilities 2022. This policy serves as a framework to deliver essential services to persons with disabilities and strengthen their rights. Recognizing the importance of sexual and reproductive health for persons with disabilities, especially women and girls, the Persons with Disabilities Act 2020 guarantees their right to enjoy family life and have intimate relationships. However, we are saddened by the continued instances of sexual and gender-based violence targeting women and girls with disabilities, particularly those with intellectual disabilities. To combat this, the government, in collaboration with UNFPA and UNICEF, has established the National Gender-Based Violence Call Center 116, enabling communities to report cases and provide support to the victims. We also understand the significance of access to information and digitalization of persons with.
I thank the distinguished representative of Uganda, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of El Salvador.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. El Salvador welcomes the holding of this CRPD COP16. This is an opportunity for renewed commitment, which for my country is even more relevant than ever. We have national priorities which we are implementing through our National Council for the Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities, COSP16, and also working with other key institutions. The general theme for this session, namely aligning national policies and strategies with the Convention, as well as the three sub-themes proposed for this session, are particularly relevant and align with our national efforts. We have worked to address the needs of persons with disabilities across the board, including in our comprehensive healthcare system since 2019. And in 2021, we adopted a comprehensive healthcare model. And we have a number of ministries working in this regard, including COSP16 and the Ministry of Health. National institutions are taking a cross-cutting approach and addressing issues to improve the quality of life of persons with disabilities and ensuring services, sexual and reproductive health care services for women, and addressing the prevention of sexually transmitted disease. We have focused on prevention as well and established technical norms, and we hope to break down barriers in accessing services. We also have a number of computers that have been distributed to 2,000 students attending special education facilities. That equipment takes account of the special needs of each student. I would close this statement by expressing El Salvador's recognition of the needs of persons with disabilities and our commitment to ensuring tangible results, reducing the vulnerabilities of this important segment of our population, leaving no one behind. This is an important year to review our progress in complying with Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, and we hope to continue to do everything possible to ensure the full inclusion of persons with disabilities in all the SDGs. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of El Salvador, and I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Shukran, Sayyid al-Rais.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our ratification of the CRPD and its voluntary optional protocol in 2009 was based on two main factors in the preamble of the convention, that is, dignity is inherent for all people regardless of their physical status, and the need to recognize the obstacles that prevent the full enjoyment of rights by persons with disabilities. Recognizing this and in line with our efforts to fully include persons with disability in all aspects of life, including education, employment, culture, sports, and others, the Syrian government, established a legal framework that guarantees all human rights for persons with disability and took measures that prohibit discrimination against them in all areas, and included them and ensured their participation in developing policies and legislations for their full inclusion within the community by preparing a national strategy for disability in Syria 2022-2023. My country offers programs for rehabilitation of persons with mental and hearing impairments, in addition to programs for prosthetics, in addition to supporting productive enterprises of persons with disability by offering concessional loans and not-for-profit financial facilitation. At the same time, we also collaborate with international organizations and civil society organizations who care for persons with disability in developing programs that provide financial and technical support to them, as well as awareness raising, inclusion, and training of staff. Mr. Chair, the terrorist war against Syria had a grave impact on persons with disability. The aggression by foreign aggression led to increasing in the inherent and compounded cases of disability, as well as the fact that civilians, particularly children, are susceptible to the threats of explosions, explosives, and mines and unexploded ammunition in areas left by terrorist groups. In parallel, the unilateral coercive measures imposed by a number of Western countries against my country led to a decline in the types and quality of services provided to persons with disability and limited our ability to provide the supplies needed for educational and rehabilitation services for persons with disability, allowing them to access prosthetics, wheelchairs, and other medical equipment, which led to aggravating their suffering. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank the distinguished representative of the Syrian Arab Republic, and I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
I thank you, Mr. Chair. We align our statement to the statement delivered by Malaysia on behalf of ASEAN and by Australia on behalf of MICTA. Since its ratification of CRPD, Indonesia has achieved several milestones reflecting its commitment to the rights of persons with disabilities. One of the most recent ones is the establishment of an independent national commission on the rights of persons with disabilities last year to closely observe the national commitment to the agenda. Also last year, we successfully conducted a comprehensive and constructive dialogue with the Committee of the Convention on the implementation of the Convention. The achievement of this milestone was not coming without challenges, as a country of more than 275 million people spread across more than 17,000 islands, geographical and social complexities are among the tangible challenges that we face. Learning from our experience, we would like to share 3 important points to harmonize and turn national policies and strategies into actions. First, integration of data is vital to provide solid foundation for policies and strategies. In Indonesia, data collection on persons with disabilities is mainstream within the National Integrated Welfare Data. Centralized under the Ministry of Social Affairs, it allows the government to maintain granular focus on the well-being of persons with disabilities and their families. Until now, within the 100 million people covered by the program, particular care has been provided to more than 1 million persons with disabilities. Second, the integration of the rights of persons with disabilities must never be an afterthought. In Indonesia, the mainstreaming and integration of the rights of persons with disabilities has been conducted comprehensively in all stages of the development policies and plans. One of the concrete examples is the inclusion of disabilities responsive perspective in disaster risk reduction agendas, where special needs of persons with disabilities are being taken into account in the designing of early warning systems. Last, paradigm shift is needed to see persons with disabilities beyond just as beneficiaries to policies. In the past few years, Indonesia has implemented Nusantara Economic Heroes. It is a training and mentorship program that aims to strengthen people's capacity, skills to contribute to economic development. One of the results are creative economy and family-based MSMEs. Now the program has reached 10,000 families across Indonesia, within which are significant numbers of persons with disabilities owned and led creative economy and MSMEs. Mr. Chair, Indonesia is committed to also share good experience at regional and global level. It is within our fervent understanding that it takes everyone to ensure the meaningful implementation of CRPD for all persons with disabilities. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia, and I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of Bulgaria.
Thank you, Chair. Bulgaria aligns itself with the statement made by the European Union, and I would like to make a few points in my national capacity. This year's topic on harmonizing national policies and strategies with the CRPD is of great relevance to my country, and we also recognize that a lot more needs to be done to ensure that persons with disabilities can fully enjoy their rights. My main message today is that Bulgaria's policies are based on the steadfast commitment to support persons with disabilities in the fields of employment and accessibility. The implementation of the National Strategy for Persons with Disabilities for the period 2021-2030 plays a key role in this direction. This strategy reflects the political will to implement the commitments from the CRPD and the recommendations of the committee under the Convention. Turning now to the normative and institutional framework in place in Bulgaria, I would like to highlight that the core national legal instrument related to the rights of persons with disabilities in Bulgaria is the Act of Law on Persons with Disabilities in force since 2019. It provides for the normative and the institutional framework for establishing the National Council for Persons with Disabilities under the auspices of the Convention and the monitoring board with the competence to promote and monitor the implementation of the provisions of the CRPD at the national level. Further, the normative framework includes the Act of Law on Personal Assistance adopted in 2019. It establishes a system for providing financial support for personal assistance so that people in need of personal assistance will be facilitated in exercising their basic rights, will enjoy better choices and greater ability to live independently, and will be offered more opportunities for social inclusion. Bulgaria's personal assistance policy is based on a personal assessment to establish the scope of needs and reflects the CRPD principle of an individual approach in assessing disabilities and social inclusion options. Next, I would like to address the opportunities for better inclusion of the people with disabilities provided for in the CRPD compliant law on Bulgarian Sign Language in force since 2021. This piece of legislation promotes the recognition of the Bulgarian Sign Language and the right of persons.
I thank the distinguished representative of Bulgaria, and I give now the floor to the distinguished representative of Venezuela.
De la conferencia.
I'm pleased to speak to you on behalf of my country. Through our national plan to address issues facing persons with disabilities, we have drafted a specific action agenda with short and medium-term goals. We have mapped out solutions in order to prioritize their needs. I would underscore the fact that prior to the unilateral coercive measures, the government made every effort to ensure gradual, progressive, and comprehensive recovery for the state. Our republic is living through a time of change, and it is worthwhile mentioning that. We have established specific laws for different forms of disabilities. These laws were agreed upon in the first debate, and that has meant that between 2022 and 23, we have drafted special laws for workers with disabilities, as well as a comprehensive care plan for persons suffering from disorders on the autism spectrum. We are also now addressing the healthcare needs of deaf persons and persons who are hard of hearing. We are also working towards ensuring the establishment throughout the country of mandatory norms and rules on accessibility, ensuring proper treatment, inclusion in the labor market, and the enforceability of the ABI certificate. Recently, we set up the community training school known as the Dr. Jose Gregorio Hernandez School to promote our national training plan for persons with disabilities, their family members, and the public in general. We have also set up a monitoring committee to take on board the recommendations of the Committee on Human Rights of Persons with Disabilities so that we can fully implement the provisions enshrined in the Convention. And finally, on behalf of our President, Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela affirms its commitment to the Constitution, to the implementation of the Convention, and to the UN system. And we are committed to working with persons with disabilities. We see them as persons with rights and the right to full and participatory socialization. Thank you.
The distinguished representative of Venezuela. And now I give the floor to our last speaker today, which is Timor-Leste. And because of time restraints, we have to stop here and move on to the adoption of the decisions and the closing. And I apologize for member states and NGOs who could not deliver their statements today, but they can send them to e-statements to be included in the compilation of the documents of the conference and recognized in the report of the session. So as I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste, I ask my colleagues, members of the Bureau, to join me in the podium. Timor-Leste, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me congratulate you and Bureau members. Mr. Chair, Timor-Leste just ratified the Convention on the Right of the Person with Disabilities and became a state party in July 2022. Therefore, it gives me great pleasure for the first time representing my country to participate and deliver the statement as a state party to the Convention at the 16th Conference of State Parties. Persons with disabilities constitute a significant portion of the population worldwide, yet they remain one of the most marginalized and vulnerable populations. Over the past decade, the awareness and understanding of the issue related to the disability rights has grown. In particular, the Convention of the Rights of the Person with Disabilities, adopted in 2006 and entered into force of May 3, 2008, has been integrated to advancing recognition of the human rights of persons with disabilities. Mr. Chair, Timor-Leste is fully committed to the rights of persons with disabilities. The Constitution of Timor-Leste guarantees that disabled citizens have equal rights, and no citizens can be discriminated against on the grounds of physical or mental conditions. The government of Timor-Leste has taken promotive, preventive, protective, and transformative measures to ensure rights and provide assistance to persons with disabilities so that they are able to lead a dignified life, participate in social activities, and enjoy their rights and freedom as other fellow citizens in the country. Some policies and programs have been formulated and implemented to ensure rights based on non-discriminatory approach to persons with disabilities. As part of this political commitment, the government grants subsidies to persons with disabilities, therapy centers, endorsed its National Action Plan 2021-2030, and initiating the process of establishing the National Council of Persons with Disabilities, which aims to promote, protect, and ensure the full enjoyment of all human rights and fundamental freedoms of all persons with disabilities. Mr. Chair, though we have come a long way, we are cognizant that there is still much to be done to make these services and facilities evenly accessible to every person in need, living both in urban and rural areas. States parties to CRPD have their own realities and have different levels of fulfilling their obligation to the Convention. Some are more advanced and some are less. Despite these differences, our goal does not change. It remains to reach out the farthest behind, help them unless
I thank the distinguished representative of Timor-Leste, and I kindly ask Bureau members, the vice presidents, to join me here in the podium. Distinguished delegates, I now move on to the next agenda item, that is item 6, decision to be considered for adoption by the Conference of States Parties. Colleagues, the Bureau, in conclusion with our regional groups, proposed to this conference 3 decisions. The draft text of these 3 decisions was introduced to delegation via your regional representative in the Bureau, seeking approval by consensus by 15th of May 2023. Since no objection was received by the set deadline, in my capacity as the President of the Bureau and the Conference, may I invite state parties to take action to endorse these proposals, by which we would decide: first, that the 17th session will be scheduled tentatively to take place from 11th to 13th of June 2024. That we recommend to the Secretary General that future sessions of the conference be provided adequate resources and support, including for accessibility of facilities and services for convening 6 official meetings over 3 days. And third, to further request the Secretary General to inform us in due course the issuance of the report of this session of the conference. I see no objection. May I take it that the conference would adopt the decisions as proposed? It is so adopted. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now reached the closing session of the conference. I would like to invite the vice presidents of the conference, distinguished representatives from Georgia, Greece, Panama, and Sri Lanka, to say a few words before we close the meeting. First, I welcome Ms. Ekaterine Lord Kipanidze, Vice President of the conference from Georgia, to make her final remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Excellency, dear colleagues. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to address you and sum up my experience as a Vice Chair of the COSP16 Bureau. At the outset, I would like to express my gratitude to the Chair of our Bureau, His Excellency Permanent Representative of Tunisia, Mr. Tarek Ladeb, for his leadership and guidance throughout the whole preparatory work for the COSP16. I applaud my dear Bureau members for their tireless efforts to make CRPD COSP16 session a success. I would also like to express my sincere gratitude to the Secretariat, DESA, for their valuable support and technical assistance, and special thanks goes to all of the interpreters and technical staff for their dedication and hard work. On a personal note, as an individual who myself has experienced a form of disability in my 30s, I am particularly honored to represent my country, Georgia, for the first time in the COSP Bureau, and use this opportunity in order to further advance the protection of the rights of the persons with disabilities at the international level. It was a historic achievement of the Bureau to select equal access to and accessibility of sexual and reproductive health services for persons with disabilities as one of the conference sub-themes. And this is the first time sexual and reproductive health and rights was discussed at the conference roundtable. Wrapping up the COSP16 after 3 days of marathon of wide range and productive discussions, roundtables and side events, exploring innovative ways to promote and advance the rights of persons with disabilities, it is our joint responsibility to take stock to all the initiatives and innovative ideas that has been proposed during these 3 days and start translating them into concrete actions to make sure that next year, when we gather again here in New York for the next COSP17 session, we deliver on our promise to leave no one behind, including the persons with disabilities. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Ekaterine. I now invite Mr. Tassos Kezas, Vice President of the Conference from Greece, to share his concluding statement. You have the floor, Tassos.
Your Excellency, thank you, Mr. Chair. This year, Greece is honored to be participating as Vice Chair at the Bureau, representing WIOG. This is a privilege for my country and a role for which we are proud of. Also, it was a great honor for Greece to coordinate the first roundtable of the conference on the very important issue ensuring equal access to and accessibility of sexual and reproductive health services for persons with disabilities. I would also like to highlight that this was the very first time this important issue was discussed in the history of the conference. The annual meeting of state parties to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is one of the most important international events to discuss issues relating to CRPD. Having been ratified by 186 countries thus far, it is the convention with the highest number of signatories. On a national note, this year, we were extremely honored to have with us the President of the National Accessibility Authority of Greece, Professor Stefanidis, as a distinguished participant and contributor to the goals of Roundtable 2. Acknowledging the existence of gaps between enacted policies and practice, I would like to echo what Professor Stefanidis underlined yesterday, citing the Greek philosopher Aristotle, who claimed that there is no difference between not having laws and not enforcing laws, and calling upon our collective wisdom to ensure that accessibility is achieved in practice, instead of being simply the letter of the law. Dear colleagues, the gap between policies and practice is likely to further increase, unfortunately, instead of decrease, as we move from the by now well-defined accessibility issues to the yet uncharted territory of digital accessibility, of the emerging new tech interactive systems of extended reality, AI, and intelligent environments. Our assessment is that we all embrace the spirit of the laws too, so we need to acknowledge that we must run strides. We should significantly accelerate the pace of our actions to achieve the full implementation of appropriate legislation. On behalf of the members of the Bureau, I can assure you of our commitment. This year's 16th conference has been better than the 15th, but we aspire that next year the 17th conference will emanate an even stronger message to the world. Finally, I wish to acknowledge with sincere appreciation the trust shown by the WIOG member states to Greece, the cooperation with and the support by my colleagues, the Chair Tunisia, and the other vice chairs of the conference, Georgia, Panama, and Sri Lanka, as well as the capable support and service of the Secretariat, notably UNDESA, all the interpreters and sign languages interpreters, among many others, who worked behind the scenes and helped to make this conference such a notable success. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Tassos. I now invite Ms. Marilyn Thompson, Vice President of the Conference representing Panama, to share her remarks. You have the floor.
Gracias. En nombre de Panamá.
On behalf of Panama and as Vice President of the Bureau of the Conference of States Parties of the CRPD, representing GRULAC, I'm privileged to speak to you and to refer to COSP16. I would underscore the fact that for the first time we discussed the issue of access to sexual and sexual reproductive health care rights for persons with disabilities in a roundtable at this conference. Let this be the first of many so that we can ensure that all persons with disabilities have equal access to health care, to sexual education and reproductive health care, in particular women and girls. Similarly, I would underscore the importance of the issue of sub-theme 2, digital accessibility for persons with disabilities, and how these are tools that can lead to better and greater opportunities for education, social inclusion, political participation, access to public services, to information, and to the labor market. On sub-theme 3, roundtable 3, reaching the underrepresented groups of persons with disabilities, all of those who were here during the presentations by our panelists and the testimony that was shared by the Leprosy Mission NGO drew the same conclusion. We still have an enormous debt to pay to the community of persons with disabilities. I would like to pick up the words of the co-facilitator and the vice president of the Bureau, Igor Gonzalez de Venezuela, director of CENAIS from Panama. If we are committed to working hard to putting an end to discrimination, then this word underrepresentative will no longer exist. 16 years ago, the signing and ratification of the convention and its optional protocol by Panama marked a crucial turning point in our commitment to create an inclusive and fair society. Proof of that is the direct involvement of CENAIS in this conference. That unshakable commitment of Panama can be seen in our greater responsibility because we are vice presidents on this bureau. Let me say again that we will continue to work with Greece, Georgia, and Sri Lanka under the leadership of the presidency of Tunisia, represented by Ambassador Tarek Ladeb, to further strengthen COSP16 and its modalities, and to make sure that this multilateral space will continue to be a key platform so that persons with disabilities can have their voice heard, and that we will see them promote their rights and their involvement in our societies on an equal footing. In conclusion, I'd like to thank the Secretariat, the interpreters, and all of those who made it possible for this conference to be a success. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. Finally, I kindly invite Mr. Sugishwara Gunaratna, Vice President of the conference from Sri Lanka, to make his remarks. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, over the last 3 days, we have deliberated upon the latest developments in the implementation of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, both from a national perspective as well as an international perspective. There is no doubt that there is much more work to do, but I think all of us can to a certain extent be satisfied that there is forward momentum in creating that vital awareness that those who are disabled have an important role to play in contributing to the well-being of their respective societies, and it is incumbent on all states to ensure that they are given that opportunity to provide that contribution. If one goes back in history, when the Millennium Development Goals were adopted, within those 8 goals, 21 targets, and 60 indicators, disabilities was mentioned only once, and that too with respect to women giving birth in unhygienic conditions and becoming disabled afterwards. Thereafter, the discourse on disabilities was given the necessary framework and voice with the adoption of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Our annual deliberations have ensured that the rights of persons with disabilities are reflected in the global discourse taking place in multiple forums, whether it is the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030 at the International Telecommunications Union, the World Health Organization, as well as others. Change is taking place, but not at the pace that we all would like to see. Therefore, it is incumbent on each and every one of us to take the key messages that have emanated from these sessions back to our capitals, back to our countries where groundwork needs to be done, and to make that real difference that will enable all persons with disabilities to participate as equal partners and dignified human beings in the day-to-day life of our societies. As the late scientist Professor Stephen Hawking said, we have a moral duty to remove the barriers to participation and to invest sufficient funding and expertise to unlock the vast potential of people with disabilities. As a Vice Chair of the Bureau, it has been a great privilege to work under the chairmanship of His Excellency Tarek Ladeb of Tunisia and alongside my fellow colleagues Tassos Kesas from Greece, Ekaterina Lokpanidze of Georgia, and Marilyn Thompson of Panama to organize this session. We have had the participation of over 1,000 delegates, which is testimony to the global interest that this conference generates. It was also my added pleasure to have co-chaired the roundtable on digital accessibility for persons with disabilities, which I believe is the new frontier that needs to be won in our common endeavor to ensure the rights of the disabled. I also wish to take this opportunity to thank the Secretariat for being the backbone in organizing this conference and providing the Bureau with the necessary support for the Bureau to take informed decisions on behalf of all of us. Finally, as we continue on our journey, let us remember how far we have come, not just how far we have to go. We are not where we want to be, but neither are we where we used to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sogishwara, for your contribution. Excellencies, participants, and friends, before I proceed to my closing remarks, I would like to ask you, all of you, to remember and honor the departed international leading disability activists who departed since the last COSP. Maybe I don't have the exhaustive list, but I have Judith Haman, who left us on the 4th of March 2023, Danlami Basharu, who left us on the 6th of June 2023, Jolene Santigoides, who left us in May 2023. I kindly ask you to observe a minute of silence in honor to them. Thank you. Thank you very much. Excellencies, participants, and friends, this year's 16th session of the COSP truly demonstrated the renewed energy and engagement among us all, state parties, UN entities, and civil society friends, with multilateral processes such as COSP. Needless to say, the COSP comprises the most important international event on disability at the UN and rightly attracts people from communities of persons with disabilities from across the globe. The 16th session serves as a reminder of the fundamental importance of the CRPD and the need to continue advancing the rights of persons with disability. A milestone reached during this session is that for the very first time in the history of COSP, it tackled the topic of sexual and reproductive rights of persons with disabilities. Indeed, ensuring equal access to and accessibility of sexual and reproductive health services for persons with disabilities was a sub-theme of this year's session and was the focus of the discussion of Roundtable 1. In today's information society, technological advances, including in digital spheres, have been providing promising potential opportunities as well as challenges for states parties in terms of meeting the needs and aspirations of persons with disabilities in society and development. Our conference during Roundtable 2 had some in-depth discussions on digital accessibility with the view to fill up existing digital divides and achieve digital inclusion for all persons with disabilities. Similarly, The 16th session of the COSP also marked a milestone in its tackling of the issue of the underrepresentation of certain groups of persons with disabilities who have been excluded from the benefits of the implementation of the CRPD. The Bureau elected to focus on this important dimension as part of Roundtable 3, to highlight the necessity of integrating the diversity of persons with disabilities, their diverse voices, perspectives and needs, when devising policies and strategies for the implementation of the CRPD. The 16th session has therefore marked a clear path for future sessions to continue to push forward the most pressing issues, with the goal of achieving the full inclusion and empowerment of all persons with disabilities across the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been an honor for Tunisia to serve as the president of the 16th session of the Conference of State Parties. Putting this conference together would have not been possible without the cooperation and the coordination between all stakeholders, both within and outside the UN. I would like to thank each of the vice presidents of the conference, Georgia, Greece, Panama, and Sri Lanka, for your active and valuable participation and cooperation in the preparation of the conference, as well as your role in co-chairing and coordinating the various segments of the conference. Furthermore, the success of this conference depends greatly on the experience and commitment of the Secretariat to advancing the rights of persons with disabilities. On behalf of the Bureau, a warm and sincere thank you to all at the Secretariat and their partners across and beyond the UN system who provided sign language interpretation, closed caption, and easy-to-understand documentation, and many more who provided services and supports. Collectively, you helped make this conference a success. Last but not least, as President of the conference and on behalf of the Bureau, I would like to extend our sincere thanks and gratitude to the organizations of persons with disabilities and members of civil society for their tireless commitment to the CRPD and the energy and enthusiasm that they bring to the COSP every year. We are grateful for your participation and for keeping us on the right track. I would also like to extend my gratitude to all of you who traveled to New York and participated in this year's session. Thank you. We look forward to continuing our work for the next session of the COSP. With this, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations.